The last thing my son said before 3 years of silence was, "Forget you exist, old man." He laughed. His wife laughed harder. I stood in my empty kitchen, holding a phone that had already gone dead. 3 years later, at his sister's wedding in the garden I built with my own hands, he dropped to his knees in front of everyone and begged me to let him back in. But by then, I had already found my real family. Hello, and thank you for being here with me. Before we continue, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you are watching from. Your presence matters more than you know. Just a quick note. This story includes some fictional elements added for storytelling and reflection. Any similarities are coincidental, but the message may resonate deeply. My name is Franklin Holloway. People call me Frank. I am 67 years old now, sitting on the porch of my small house in Asheville, North Carolina, watching the Blue Ridge Mountains turn purple in the evening light. 3 years of distance have given me something I did not have when this story began. Clarity. The kind that only comes after you stop begging for love from people who were never going to give it. I spent 38 years as a high school principal. 38 years of early mornings, parent-teacher conferences, graduation speeches, and the quiet belief that if you showed up consistently enough, if you gave enough of yourself, people would see your worth. I retired in June, 3 years ago. The school threw me a party. My colleagues gave speeches. Some of them cried. My son Bryce did not attend. He said he had a meeting in Charlotte that could not be rescheduled. His wife Kendra had a spa appointment. My daughter Natalie drove 4 hours from Asheville to be there. She sat in the front row and clapped louder than anyone. 2 weeks after that party, my phone rang on a Tuesday evening. I was sitting in the living room of the house where I had raised both my children. The house that still smelled like my wife Margaret, even 5 years after she passed. I saw Bryce's name on the screen, and my heart did what it always did. It hoped. "Dad," he said. And there was that voice. The one that meant he wanted something. I had learned to recognize it over 36 years of being his father, but I had never learned to stop hoping I was wrong. "Bryce, how are you? How is Kendra?" "Fine. Listen, I need to talk to you about something important." No warmth. No. "How are you settling into retirement?" Just the preamble to a request. "All right," I said carefully. "What is it? You got that retirement bonus, right? The $180,000? My stomach tightened. Word travels fast when money is involved. I did. The school board approved it as part of my pension package. 38 years of service. Good. That is great, Dad. Listen, I have an opportunity. Cryptocurrency. Kendra's brother is running a fund, and they are seeing 40% returns. I need $80,000 to buy in before the window closes. I sat with that number for a moment. $80,000. Nearly half of everything I had earned in 38 years of waking up at 5:30 in the morning, of breaking up fights in hallways, of staying late to counsel students whose parents never showed up. "Bryce, I do not know anything about cryptocurrency," I said slowly. "That is a lot of money. Have you spoken to a financial advisor? Someone independent who could?" "Dad." His voice sharpened. "This is not about what you know. This is about whether you trust me, whether you actually want to help your own son succeed." I heard Kendra in the background. Her voice was low but pointed. She was coaching him. She always was. "I trust you," I said. "But I do not trust an investment I cannot understand. I am 64 years old, Bryce. This money is my security, my retirement. I cannot gamble with it." "Gamble." He repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "You think I am asking you to gamble? I am asking you to invest in your son's future. But I forgot. You were always better at investing in other people's children than your own." The words landed exactly where he intended them to land. In the soft place between my ribs, where 38 years of guilt already lived. The guilt of being a principal who gave everything to his school and came home too tired to give his own children the same energy. "That is not fair," I said quietly. "You know what is not fair?" Bryce's voice rose. "Watching your father spend his whole life at a school, missing your baseball games, missing your birthdays because some kid needed counseling, and then when he finally retires with money, he would rather let it rot in a savings account than help his own flesh and blood." I closed my eyes. I could hear Kendra whispering something. Then Bryce laughed. Not a real laugh. A cold one. A weapon. "You know what, Dad? Forget it. Keep your money. Keep sitting in that empty house talking to yourself. You are pathetic. A small-town principal with small-town thinking. Kendra was right about you. Bryce, please. Forget you exist, old man." He said it clearly, slowly, like he wanted to make sure every syllable landed. Then Kendra laughed in the background, bright and cruel, and the line went dead. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after that. The phone grew cold in my hand. The house was silent, in that absolute way that only empty houses can be. I looked at the table where Margaret and I had eaten 10,000 meals together. I looked at the chair where Bryce used to sit as a boy, swinging his legs because they did not reach the floor. I looked at the refrigerator where his drawings had once hung, held up by magnets shaped like apples, and I realized something that changed everything. I was not just standing in an empty kitchen. I was standing in an empty life. The school was gone. Margaret was gone. And now, Bryce had made it clear. He was gone too. Not because I had failed him, but because I had nothing left to give him. That night I did not sleep. I sat on my bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the silence, and I made a decision. I was done waiting for my son to decide I was worth loving. I was done sitting in this house full of ghosts, hoping for a phone call that was never going to come. I was done, but I did not know yet what I was moving toward. I only knew what I was leaving behind. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table the way I had every morning for 30 years. 4 chairs around that table. 4. Margaret's chair across from mine, still pushed in at the angle she always left it. Natalie's chair by the window where she used to read while eating breakfast. Bryce's chair closest to the door, because even as a child, he was always halfway out of the room, always rushing towards something else, someone else, somewhere that was not here. I poured coffee into a mug that said "World's Best Principal." A student had given it to me in 2009. The paint was chipping now, the words fading. I drank from it anyway because some things deserve to be used even after they stop looking new. The silence in that house was different from the silence of the night before. Night silence is supposed to be quiet. Morning silence is wrong. Morning is supposed to have sound. The scrape of a chair, the clink of a spoon, someone humming, someone asking if there is more milk. But there was nothing. Just me, and 4 chairs, and a mug with fading words. I thought about the retirement party. 300 people had shown up. 300. Teachers I had mentored. Students I had counseled, who were now doctors and lawyers and mechanics and parents. The cafeteria was decorated with banners that read, "Thank you, Mr. Holloway and 38 years of excellence." People stood in line to shake my hand. Some of them brought their children to meet me. One woman, a former student from my first year, drove 6 hours from Virginia to say that I had saved her life when she was 16 and thinking about ending it. Bryce was not there. He had texted that morning. "Can't make it. Meeting in Charlotte." Congrats though. Congrats though. 2 words and an abbreviation to summarize 38 years. Kendra had not even bothered to send that much. But Natalie. My Natalie drove 4 hours from Asheville in a yellow sundress with wildflowers she had picked from her garden wrapped in brown paper. She sat in the front row, and when the superintendent handed me the plaque, she stood up and cheered like I had just won something that mattered. Because to her, I had. I remembered the moment I realized Bryce was gone. Not the phone call from last night. That was just the final confirmation. The real loss happened years earlier. Slowly, in pieces so small, I almost did not notice them falling away. It started when he met Kendra at a finance conference in New York. She came from money. Her family owned property in 3 states. Her father drove a car that cost more than my annual salary. And Bryce, my boy who used to help me grade papers at this very table, who used to ask me questions about history and listen with genuine curiosity, that boy started to disappear. First, it was the way he talked about my job. You are still doing the principal thing? Like it was a hobby. Like 38 years of shaping young lives was something a person did while waiting for a real career to start. Then it was the holidays. Fewer visits. Shorter calls. Kendra always had somewhere more important to be. Her family's beach house. Her friend's wedding in Aspen. A charity gala that required Bryce's presence because appearances mattered in their world. Then Margaret got sick. And Bryce came to the funeral in a suit that cost $3,000 and left before the reception because Kendra had a flight to catch. He hugged me at the graveside and said, "She is in a better place, Dad." Then he was gone. His mother was in the ground, and he was gone before the dirt settled. I should have seen it then. I should have understood that the son I raised was being replaced by someone I did not recognize. Someone who measured people by their net worth. Someone who saw his father's life as small and embarrassing. Someone who married a woman who laughed at old men on the phone. But I did not see it. Or maybe I saw it and chose not to believe it. Because believing it would have meant admitting that I had lost both Margaret and Bryce. And I was not ready for that kind of emptiness. I sat at that table for 2 hours that morning. I drank 3 cups of coffee and watched the sunlight move across the floor the way it had always moved, indifferent to who was sitting there watching it. And somewhere around the 3rd cup, I thought about what Margaret would say if she were here. She would say, "Franklin, you cannot grow anything in dead soil. If the ground will not nourish you, find ground that will." Margaret always talked like that, in metaphors about growing things. She kept a garden, our entire marriage. Tomatoes, peppers, herbs, flowers that bloomed in impossible colors. She said gardening was her way of proving that patience and care could turn nothing into something beautiful. I never had time for it while I was working. I never understood why she spent hours kneeling in dirt when there were papers to grade and meetings to attend. I understand now. That afternoon I called Natalie. She answered on the first ring. She always did. "Dad, how are you? I have been thinking about you all morning." She knew. Somehow, she already knew that something was wrong. Daughters have that instinct. The same way they know when it is raining before they look outside. "Bryce called last night," I said. I did not tell her everything. Just enough. The money, the refusal, the words. The silence on her end lasted 5 seconds. Then, "I am going to kill him." "Natalie." "No, Dad. I am serious." Who says that to their father? Who laughs at their own father? Her voice cracked. Not from sadness, from rage. Pure protective rage that only a daughter can feel for a father she loves. "I am okay," I said, even though I was not sure that was true. "You are not okay, and you should not have to be okay with this." She paused. I could hear her breathing, gathering herself. "Dad, listen to me. Come to Asheville. Come be near me. You do not have to be alone anymore. This house, that town, there is nothing left for you there. Come here. Start over. Start over." At 64 years old, the idea seemed impossible and necessary at the same time. "I do not know, sweetheart. Moving is a big Dad." Her voice was firm now, the teacher voice she used with her 2nd graders. "You spent 38 years taking care of everyone else. Let someone take care of you for once. Let me." I looked around the kitchen. The 4 chairs. The fading mug. The sunlight that did not care whether anyone was watching. The silence that Margaret used to fill with humming, and Natalie used to fill with laughter, and Bryce used to fill with questions that he stopped asking a long time ago. "Okay," I said. Okay, sweetheart. I will come. 2 weeks later, I planted a for sale sign in the front yard. It was the first time in 64 years that I did something without knowing exactly what came next. The first time I moved toward something instead of waiting for something to come to me. The ground beneath that sign was dry and hard. Nothing had grown there in years. But somewhere in Asheville, I did not know it yet. There was soil waiting for me. Rich and dark and ready for seeds I did not even know I was carrying. 2 months later, I drove into Asheville for the first time with everything I owned packed into a rented truck. The house in Connecticut had sold faster than I expected. The new owners were a young couple expecting twins. They walked through the rooms planning nurseries and play areas while I signed papers that erased 30 years of my life from a piece of property. The drive south took 11 hours. I stopped twice for gas, and once at a rest stop in Virginia, where I ate a sandwich I could not taste. Somewhere around the North Carolina border, the landscape changed. The highway began to climb. Mountains rose on either side, blue-green and ancient. Their ridges soft against a sky that seemed wider than anything I had known in Connecticut. And then I rolled down the window and smelled it. Earth, wet from a recent rain, rich and dark and alive in a way that pavement never is. It came through the window like a message I was not expecting. Like the land itself was saying something. Asheville sits in a valley surrounded by the Blue Ridge Mountains. I had visited Natalie here twice before, but always briefly, always with the intention of returning to my real life. Now there was no real life to return to. This was it. This small city with its art galleries and street musicians and farmers markets and mountains that turned purple at sunset. This was where I was going to learn who Franklin Holloway was when he was not standing behind a podium or sitting in an empty kitchen. The house Natalie helped me find was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with a window that faced west toward the mountains. It sat on a 1/4 acre of land at the edge of a neighborhood called Oakley, about 20 minutes from downtown. The previous owners had let the yard go wild. Weeds grew waist-high along the fence. The flower beds were choked with crabgrass. A single dogwood tree stood in the center of the backyard, its branches reaching upward like hands asking for something. I moved in on a Thursday. Natalie came to help. She brought her second graders' handmade welcome cards that said things like, "Welcome to Asheville, Mr. Frank," with backward letters and too much glitter. I taped them to the refrigerator, the way I used to tape Bryce's drawings when he was small enough to believe his father was worth impressing. For the first 2 weeks, I did not know what to do with myself. 38 years of 5:30 alarms and structured days had built a rhythm into my bones that retirement shattered. I woke at 5:30 anyway. I made coffee anyway. I put on a collared shirt anyway. But then there was nowhere to go. No office. No hallway full of teenagers. No stack of papers requiring my attention. I walked downtown some mornings. Asheville was beautiful in that early autumn light. The leaves were just beginning to turn. Buskers played guitar on street corners. Couples walked hand in hand past bookstores and coffee shops. Everyone seemed to belong somewhere. Everyone seemed to have a purpose. I watched them the way a man watches a language he does not speak. Impressed, but unable to participate. The loneliness was different here than it had been in Connecticut. There, the house was full of memories, full of Margaret and the children, and 30 years of accumulated life. The loneliness there was the loneliness of loss. Here in Asheville, the loneliness was the loneliness of absence. Nothing to lose because nothing was there yet. Just empty rooms and silence, and a man who did not know how to fill either. I started gardening on a Tuesday in mid-September. Not because I had a plan. Not because Margaret's voice in my memory told me to. But because the weeds were getting worse and the neighbors would start to talk, and a principal's instinct for maintaining appearances dies hard. I bought gloves and a shovel and seeds from the hardware store on Merrimon Avenue. The clerk, a young woman with dirt under her fingernails, asked what I was growing. "I have no idea," I told her honestly. She smiled and handed me a packet of tomato seeds and said, "Start with these. They are forgiving." Forgiving, I like that word applied to a plant. I cleared the weeds that first week. It was harder than I expected. My back ached. My hands blistered beneath the gloves. But there was something in the labor. Something in the act of pulling dead things out of the ground and making space for new things to grow that felt like more than yard work. It felt like confession. Like I was pulling up all the dead expectations and failed hopes and unanswered phone calls and making room for something I could not yet name. By the end of September, I had 3 raised beds built from lumber I bought at a yard sale. Tomatoes in one, peppers and herbs in another. The third I left empty because I did not know what to plant yet. Margaret would have known. She always knew what went where, but Margaret was gone. And I was learning to make decisions without her. It was the tomatoes that brought Doris. A Saturday afternoon in early October. I was kneeling in the dirt, staking the plants that had grown faster than I anticipated, when I heard a voice from the other side of my fence. "Those are the prettiest tomatoes I have seen all season. And I have seen a lot of tomatoes." I looked up. A woman stood at my fence. She was about 70, black, with silver hair cut close to her head and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She wore a faded apron over a blue dress, and she was leaning on the fence with both arms like she had been watching me for a while. "Thank you," I said, standing slowly, my knees protesting. "I am Doris. Doris Whitfield. I live right there." She pointed to the yellow house next door. "Been watching you dig for 3 weeks now. Wondered when you were going to produce something worth stealing." I almost smiled. Almost. "Frank Holloway. I just moved here from up north." "I know. Natalie told me her daddy was coming." She tilted her head, studying me with eyes that seemed to see more than I was showing. "You always eat alone?" The question was simple. 5 words. But something in the way she asked it, direct and gentle at the same time, like she already knew the answer, but wanted me to say it out loud, made my throat tighten. "Yes," I said. "I do." Doris nodded slowly, like I had confirmed something she suspected. She did not offer pity. She did not tilt her head with that sympathetic look people give widowers and lonely old men. She just looked at me steadily and said, "Come by Sunday morning. I want to show you something. 7 o'clock. Wear shoes you do not mind getting dirty." Then she reached over the fence, plucked a ripe tomato from my vine without asking, and walked back to her yellow house, biting into it like an apple. I stood there in my garden, dirt on my hands, watching this stranger disappear into her house with my tomato. And for the first time in months, I felt something that was not grief or loneliness or confusion. I felt curious. Sunday morning. 7 o'clock. Shoes I did not mind getting dirty. I had no idea what I was walking into. But I was going to show up. Because showing up was the only thing I had ever known how to do. Sunday morning came and I almost did not go. I stood in my kitchen at 6:45, dressed in old khakis and a shirt I did not mind ruining, and I thought about all the reasons to stay home. I did not know these people. I did not know what Doris wanted to show me. I was 64 years old, and the idea of walking into a group of strangers made my palms sweat the way they had not since my first day as a principal 38 years ago. But I went. Because Doris had taken my tomato without asking, and somehow that boldness deserved to be honored. Because staying home meant another Sunday of silence. Because Margaret's voice in my memory whispered, "Franklin, go. What is the worst that could happen?" The address Doris had given me was 6 blocks from my house. I walked because the morning was cool, and the leaves were turning gold along the sidewalks, and I needed the time to calm my nerves. I passed houses with porch swings and wind chimes. A dog barked behind a fence. Someone was already mowing their lawn despite the early hour. Then I turned a corner and saw it. Behind an old Baptist church with peeling white paint and a steeple that leaned slightly to the left, there was a piece of land. Maybe half an acre, fenced with mismatched wood and chain link. And on that land, in the pale gold of early morning sunlight, at least a dozen people were working. Digging, planting, carrying buckets of water. Laughing. They were all ages. A white-haired man in overalls was turning soil with a pitchfork. Two teenagers in matching school jerseys were laying mulch along a row of greens. A young mother pushed a wheelbarrow while her toddler sat inside it, giggling at the bumps. An older couple, both wearing straw hats, were tying tomato plants to stakes with the kind of practiced ease that comes from doing something together for years. And in the middle of it all, Doris. She stood with her hands on her hips, directing traffic, like a general in a faded apron. When she saw me at the gate, her face broke into a grin, so wide it seemed to rearrange her entire expression. "Franklin Holloway, you came." She said it like I had just given her a gift. "Get in here. We have work to do." I stepped through the gate and into a world I did not know existed. The air smelled different inside that fence, like turned earth and compost, and something green and growing, like possibility had a scent. "Everyone," Doris called out, and people actually stopped what they were doing to look. "This is Frank. He is new. He is my neighbor. He grows excellent tomatoes, and he does not know what to do with himself on Sunday mornings. We are going to fix that." There were waves and nods and a few welcome. Frank calls from across the garden. No one seemed surprised by a stranger appearing. No one seemed inconvenienced. Like this happened regularly. Like new people wandering in on Sunday mornings was simply part of how things worked here. A man approached me. Tall, broad-shouldered, mid-40s, with hands that looked like they had been working since birth. Dark skin, close-cropped hair, and his mother's direct gaze. "Raymond," he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm and warm. "I am Doris's son. She has been talking about the neighbor with the tomatoes all week." "Welcome, Frank," I said, though he clearly already knew. "You ever work a community garden before?" "No." Raymond nodded like that was perfectly acceptable. He walked to a shed near the back fence and returned with a hoe. Not a new one. The handle was worn smooth from years of hands gripping it. He placed it in my palm. "Start here," he said, pointing to a patch of ground that needed turning. "Do not think too hard about it. Just put it in the dirt and pull." So I did. I put the hoe in the dirt and pulled and pulled and pulled again. It was simple, mindless work. The kind that lets your body take over while your mind goes quiet. Around me, people worked and talked and laughed. No one asked me personal questions. No one wanted to know why I had moved to Asheville, or whether I had family, or what I used to do for a living. They just let me work beside them like I had always been there. About an hour in, I became aware of someone watching me. I looked up and found a girl sitting on an overturned bucket near the fence, chin in her hands, studying me with unblinking curiosity. She was maybe 12, thin and long-limbed, with dark skin and braids pulled back in a ponytail. She wore rubber boots 2 sizes too big and a t-shirt that said Asheville Middle School Science Fair. "Are you a new grandpa?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. "I am sorry? We have 3 grandpas already." She held up fingers to count. "Mr. Earl, Mr. Dennis, and Mr. Kwame. But Mr. Kwame moved to Florida last month, so now we only have 2. Are you the replacement?" I did not know what to say to that. The word grandpa landed somewhere unexpected in my chest. "This is Aaliyah," Doris said, appearing beside me with a watering can. "My granddaughter. She lives with me. She has no filter and too many questions. You will get used to it." "I am 12, Aaliyah added, as if that explained everything. "I am 64, I said, and she grinned at me like I had just passed a test. At noon, everything changed. People put down their tools. Someone rang a bell that hung from the church's back porch, and like a migration pattern, everyone moved toward a long table set up under a canopy of oak trees at the edge of the garden. The table was covered in food. Not fancy food. Not restaurant food. Real food. Collard greens and cornbread, and a pot of soup, made from vegetables, harvested that same morning. Someone brought deviled eggs. Someone else brought a peach cobbler, still warm from the oven. Plates and forks appeared. Chairs were dragged over. Children climbed onto laps. "Sit," Doris said, pointing to an empty chair between her and Raymond. "You helped grow it. You get to eat it." I sat down. Someone passed me a plate. Someone else poured lemonade into a mason jar and set it in front of me. Raymond asked if I liked hot sauce, and when I said yes, he reached across and shook it onto my greens without being asked again. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. I did not have to participate. I did not have to perform or impress or explain myself. I just sat there, eating food that tasted like the earth it came from, surrounded by people who seemed genuinely glad to share a table with someone they had met 3 hours ago. Aaliyah sat across from me, eating cornbread and watching me with those curious eyes. "You are going to come back, right?" she asked. Not shy about it, not polite, just direct. The way children are before the world teaches them to be careful with their wanting. Before I could answer, Doris put her hand on my shoulder. "Same time next Sunday?" I heard myself say yes before I had time to think about it. The word came from somewhere deeper than logic, somewhere that had been waiting a long time to say it. On the walk home, the streets looked different. The same houses, the same wind chimes, the same dog barking behind the same fence. But I was seeing them through something new, through the memory of a table full of food and strangers who did not feel like strangers. Through the echo of a 12-year-old girl asking if I was a new grandpa. Through the weight of a hoe in my hands and the feeling of earth giving way beneath it. This was the warmest I had felt in years. Warmer than any holiday dinner Bryce had ever grudgingly attended. Warmer than any meal I had eaten alone at my 4-chair table. Warmer than I thought I deserved. And all it had cost me was showing up. Every Sunday after that, I arrived a little earlier. The second week, I was there at 8. The third week, 7:30. By the fourth week, I beat Doris to the gate. She found me already kneeling in the dirt, turning soil in the bed Raymond had assigned me, and she laughed so hard she had to set down the basket she was carrying. "Lord have mercy, Franklin. You are worse than a puppy waiting at the door." I did not defend myself. She was right. I was eager in a way that embarrassed me. Eager the way I used to be, on the first day of school, every September. That anticipation of being needed, of having somewhere to go that mattered, of being part of something larger than yourself. The routine built itself without anyone planning it. I would arrive early and prep the beds. Raymond would show up around 7:15 with coffee in a thermos, 2 cups, and we would drink in silence while the sun rose over the mountains. There was something sacred about those quiet mornings with Raymond. We did not need to talk. We just worked side by side, our tools hitting the earth in a rhythm that felt like conversation. Raymond was not a man of many words. He spoke through his hands, through the careful way he rewired the irrigation system he installed for free, through the fence posts he replaced on his own time, through the way he showed me how to prune without explaining why, just demonstrating and letting me learn by watching. But one morning in late October, while we were building a new raised bed together, he said something that stayed with me. "My dad died when I was 19. He said, without looking up from the board he was measuring. "Heart attack. No warning. One morning he was here, next morning he was not." I stopped hammering. Raymond continued measuring. I spent 25 years wishing I had more time with him. Wishing he could have seen me get my electrician's license. Wishing he could have met Aaliyah. He paused, marked the board with a pencil. "And then you showed up, and my mama smiled like she has not smiled since my daddy passed." He looked at me then, direct and serious. "I am glad you are here, Frank. That is all I am saying." I did not know how to respond to that. So I just nodded, picked up my hammer, and we went back to building. But something shifted between us that morning. We were not just garden acquaintances anymore. We were something closer to what I imagined brothers might be if you found them late in life. Aaliyah attached herself to me. Lola. Lud. Trumless. Ludsephant. Slowly at first, then completely. By the fifth Sunday, she had declared herself my assistant. She followed me through the garden carrying a small notebook she called her plant journal, writing down everything I told her about soil pH levels and companion planting and why tomatoes and basil grew better together. Because they help each other. I explained one morning, kneeling beside her in the herb section. The basil repels the insects that would hurt the tomato, and the tomato gives the basil shade when the sun is too strong. They make each other better. Aaliyah wrote this down carefully, her tongue poking out from the corner of her mouth the way children do when they are concentrating. Like friends, she said. Yes, I said. Exactly like friends. She looked up at me with those brown eyes that missed nothing. You are the tomato, Grandpa Frank. And Grandma is the basil. I did not correct her on the name. Grandpa Frank. She had been testing it for weeks, slipping it into sentences like a question disguised as a statement, and each time she said it, something in my chest expanded. Something that had been clenched since Bryce's phone call loosened just a fraction more. Winter came to Asheville gently that year. The mountains turned gray, and the garden went to sleep beneath a blanket of mulch and fallen leaves. But the Sunday gatherings did not stop. They simply moved indoors. Doris opened her yellow house every Sunday morning. People brought canned vegetables from the autumn harvest. Someone always made soup. Someone always made bread. The kitchen was too small for everyone. So people spilled into the living room, the porch, the hallway. It was chaotic and loud and perfect. I brought jars of tomato sauce I had made from my own garden. The first batch was too watery. The second was too salty. By the third, Doris tasted it and said, "Now that is worth stealing." And I felt prouder of those words than of any commendation I had ever received from a school board. Then Christmas came. I had been dreading it for months. Last Christmas I had spent alone in the Connecticut house, eating soup from a can, watching television I did not care about, waiting for a phone call from Bryce that never came. The memory of it sat in my chest like a stone. But this year, Doris simply said, "Christmas dinner is at 6. Do not bring anything. Just bring yourself." She said it the way she said everything. Like refusal was not an option she was willing to entertain. I arrived at 5:45. Raymond answered the door in a sweater that said "World's Okayest Cook." And behind him, the house glowed with light and sound and the smell of food that had been cooking all day. The living room was full. The Sunday garden people were there. Neighbors were there. Aaliyah was there in a red dress, running between adults and stealing cookies from a plate on the counter. We ate until we could not move. Ham and sweet potatoes and collard greens and macaroni and cheese and 3 different kinds of pie. People told stories. Raymond's deep laugh filled the room. Doris sang a hymn while she washed dishes, and everyone went quiet to listen. After dinner, while the adults were talking in the living room, Aaliyah appeared beside me holding something behind her back. "I made you something," she said. Shy now. The confidence she wore like armor was thin tonight. She held out a card. Construction paper, folded unevenly, decorated with drawings of flowers and vegetables in colored pencil. On the front it said, "To Grandpa Frank." Inside, in careful 12-year-old handwriting, "Thank you for teaching me things. Thank you for being my friend. Thank you for showing up every Sunday. Merry Christmas. Love, Aaliyah." I read it twice. 3 times. The words blurred, and I realized my eyes were wet. I excused myself to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub and cried in a way I had not cried since Margaret's funeral. Not from sadness, from something I could not name. Relief, maybe. Or recognition. The recognition that I had been starving for exactly this kind of love and had not known it until someone offered it freely, in crayon, on construction paper. When I came out, Doris was waiting in the hallway. She did not ask what was wrong. She just squeezed my arm and said, "She means it. Every word." "I know," I said. "That is why." Later that night, I sat in my car in Doris's driveway and called Natalie. "Merry Christmas, Dad," she said. "How was it?" "Natalie," I said, and my voice cracked in a way I did not expect. "I think I found something here, sweetheart. I think I found where I belong." She was quiet for a moment. Then softly, "Good. You deserve that, Dad. You deserve that so much." I drove home through streets lit with Christmas lights, past houses full of families, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I did not feel like I was on the outside looking in. I was part of something. Something small and imperfect and real. Something that chose me. And I was choosing it back. March of the second year. The snow melted off the mountains, and the garden woke up beneath it. I stood at the edge of our half-acre plot on a Sunday morning, coffee in hand, and I saw something that bothered me. Not in a bad way, in the way that problems bother people who know how to solve them. The garden was too small. We had 30 members now. 30 people showing up every Sunday with tools and hope and nowhere to plant. The beds were overcrowded. The waiting list for plots had 12 names on it. Families were being turned away because there was simply no more room. I mentioned it to Doris that morning while we were sorting seeds in the shed. "We need more land," I said. Doris looked at me over her reading glasses. "Franklin Holloway. I have been saying that for 3 years. The church owns the lot next door, but they will not sell it, and the city does not care about a bunch of old folks playing in the dirt. Maybe they have not been asked the right way," I said. She tilted her head. "Are you volunteering?" I had not intended to. The words came out before my brain approved them. But once they were in the air, I realized something. I was a man who had spent 38 years persuading school boards to fund programs they did not want to fund, who had convinced skeptical parents that their children needed art classes and counseling services, who had stood in front of auditoriums full of teenagers and made them listen. If I could do that, I could convince a city council to give us a piece of land. "Yes," I said. "I am volunteering." Raymond heard me from the next row and looked up from his pruning. He did not say anything, just nodded once, slow and deliberate, the way he did when he approved of something. That nod meant more to me than applause. I spent 3 weeks writing the proposal. I had not written anything formal since my last budget request to the school board, but the skills came back faster than I expected. Structure, data, persuasion, the language of people who need to be convinced that something matters. I gathered numbers. How many families the garden served. How many pounds of produce we donated to the food bank each season. How many children participated in informal education programs. I took photographs of the garden in every season. I collected testimonials from members. Raymond wrote one that said, "This garden gave me my Sunday mornings back. It gave my daughter a grandfather." Doris proofread every draft. She sat at her kitchen table with her reading glasses on the tip of her nose and a red pen in her hand, crossing out words she called too fancy and writing in words she called honest. "You are trying to impress them," she said after the second draft. "Stop impressing. Start telling the truth. The truth is impressive enough." She was right. She was always right. The city council meeting was on a Wednesday evening in mid-March. The chambers were half empty, which was normal for non-controversial agenda items. I wore my best suit, the same one I had worn to school board meetings for 20 years. Raymond sat in the back row in his work clothes, having come straight from a job site. Doris sat beside him in her Sunday dress, hands folded in her lap, like she was in church. When my name was called, I stood up. My hands were steady. My voice was clear. 38 years of standing in front of people had taught me how to look confident even when my heart was racing. "My name is Franklin Holloway," I began. "I have lived in Asheville for 1 year. Before that, I spent 38 years as a high school principal. I thought when I retired, I would spend my days reading and being quiet. Instead, I found a community garden behind the old Baptist church on Oak Street, and that garden saved my life. I saw a councilwoman lean forward slightly. I am not going to show you numbers, although I have them. I am not going to talk about property values or tax benefits, although those exist too. I am going to tell you what happens every Sunday morning at 7 o'clock in that garden. And I told them about Doris and her tomatoes, about Raymond and his irrigation system, about Aaliyah and her plant journal, about the retired teacher who found purpose again, about the single mother who feeds her children vegetables she grew herself, about the teenager who stopped getting into trouble because he had somewhere to be on Sunday mornings. I spoke for 8 minutes. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then the councilwoman who had leaned forward said, "Mr. Holloway, how much land do you need?" They approved the expansion unanimously. An adjacent lot, city-owned, unused for a decade. A quarter-acre of weeds and potential. Ours. Rent-free. For as long as we maintained it. When I walked out of those chambers, Raymond was standing by the door. He grabbed my hand and pulled me into a hug so sudden it knocked the breath from my chest. He had never hugged me before. His arms were strong and his voice was rough when he said, "You did it, Frank. You actually did it." Doris was already on her phone, calling everyone. "Get your shovels ready," she told each person. "We have land." Franklin got us land. The next 6 weeks were a blur of work. Raymond organized a crew of volunteers, electricians and plumbers and carpenters from the neighborhood, who showed up on Saturdays with trucks full of materials. I designed the layout. A section for vegetables, a section for flowers, a section I labeled Education on the Blueprint because I could not help myself. I was a principal. Teaching was in my blood, the way gardening was in Doris's. We built raised beds from reclaimed wood. Raymond installed a new irrigation system with water timers and drip lines. Someone donated a greenhouse frame. Someone else donated lumber for a tool shed. The teenagers from the Sunday crew painted a mural on the church wall. Bright vegetables and flowers and hands reaching toward the sun. Opening day was a Saturday in late April. The weather cooperated. Clear skies, mild temperature. The dogwoods in full bloom along the street. 40 people showed up. Some were original members. Some were new. Some were neighbors who had been watching over their fences and finally decided to step inside. Doris insisted on a ribbon cutting. She found a red ribbon somewhere and stretched it across the new gate Raymond had welded. Then, she handed me a pair of scissors. "You do it," she said. "This was your doing." "It was everyone's doing," I said. "Fine." Everyone helped. But you asked. You spoke. You made them listen. So, cut the ribbon, Franklin, before I change my mind and do it myself. I cut the ribbon and people cheered, and Aaliyah blew a party horn she had been hiding behind her back, and Raymond clapped me on the shoulder hard enough to make me stumble forward. Doris stepped up beside me as people flowed into the new space, already claiming plots, already planning what to plant. She looked out at the expanded garden, twice its original size, buzzing with energy and purpose. "You know what this is?" she said quietly, so only I could hear. "What?" "This is what happens when you let a principal loose in a garden. He turns it into a school." I laughed. A real laugh. Full and unguarded. The kind I had not made in longer than I could remember. Around me, people were planting and planning and building something together. And I was in the middle of it. Not watching from the outside. Not hoping to be invited in. Just there. Belonging. Leading. Growing. For 38 years, my classroom had 4 walls and a whiteboard. Now, it had no walls at all. Just sky and mountains and earth and people who showed up because they wanted to be here. I was not retired. I had just changed classrooms. 2 weeks after the opening, Natalie called me on a Tuesday evening. I was sitting on my porch watching the fireflies come out over the garden. They blinked in patterns I could never quite decode. Small lights appearing and disappearing like thoughts you cannot hold on to. "Dad, I have an idea," she said. There was that excitement in her voice, the same one she had as a little girl when she figured out how to solve a puzzle before anyone else. "Tell me, what if we bring my students to the garden? Once a week. Like a field trip, but ongoing. We could build it into the science curriculum. Plant biology, ecosystems, soil composition. Everything they need to learn is right there in the dirt." I sat up straighter. The principal in me recognized a good proposal when I heard one. "You would need approval from your administration. Already working on it." My principal loves the idea. She said if we can formalize it, build a lesson plan, show measurable outcomes, she would support a pilot program for the fall. "Nathalie, yeah, that is brilliant," she laughed. "I learned from the best, Dad. We spent the summer building it together." Every Wednesday evening, Natalie drove to my house with her laptop, and we sat at my kitchen table designing lesson plans. Soil science for second graders. The life cycle of a tomato. How worms help the earth. Companion planting and friendship. That last one was Natalie's idea. Teaching children about symbiotic relationships through the metaphor of plants that help each other grow. I built small raised beds in the education section of the garden, low enough for 7-year-old arms to reach. I painted labels on wooden stakes in bright colors. I bought child-sized tools with my own money, though Doris insisted on reimbursing me for half. "This is not charity," she said when I tried to refuse. "This is investment. In children. In the future. You do not get to be noble about that." September came. The first Wednesday morning of the school year, a yellow bus pulled up to the curb beside the garden, and 18 second graders spilled out like water from an overturned bucket. They were loud and curious and completely uncontainable. They touched everything. They asked questions faster than any adult could answer. They squealed when they found earthworms and argued about who got to hold the watering can. I stood in the garden that morning, surrounded by children, and something unlocked inside me. This was what I was built for. Not the paperwork and budgets and discipline meetings of a principal's office. This. The raw, unfiltered act of teaching, of watching a child's face change when they understand something for the first time, of kneeling in the dirt with a 7-year-old and showing them how a seed becomes food. Mr. Frank, a boy named Jalen, asked me that first morning, holding a seedling with both hands like it was made of glass, "If I plant this, will it remember me?" "Plants do not have memories the way we do," I said. "But they respond to care. If you water it and give it sunlight, it will grow toward you. That is its way of remembering." Jalen looked at the seedling with absolute seriousness. "I am going to come back every week and check on it," he said. And he did. Every Wednesday for the rest of the year. The program grew faster than the tomatoes. By October, the Asheville Citizen-Times sent a reporter, a young woman with a notebook who spent the whole morning in the garden watching children learn and adults teach, and everyone get dirt under their fingernails together. She photographed Aaliyah helping a kindergartner plant marigolds. She photographed Raymond explaining the irrigation system to a group of wide-eyed third graders. She photographed me kneeling beside Jalen, both of us examining the roots of his seedling through a magnifying glass. The article ran the following Sunday. Front page of the local section. The headline read, "Retired Principal Finds New Classroom in Community Garden." They quoted Doris saying, "Frank Holloway does not know how to stop teaching. He just found a place where the lessons grow." After that article, everything accelerated. New families joined the garden every week. Local businesses donated supplies. The hardware store on Marymount Avenue started giving us a discount. A landscaping company offered free mulch delivery every spring. The food bank increased their pickup schedule because we were producing more than we could eat. By November, we had over 50 active members. The Sunday morning gatherings now required 2 long tables instead of one. The potluck meals were so abundant that people started bringing containers to take food home for the week. Children ran between the beds like it was a playground. Elderly couples tended their plots side by side. Teenagers fulfilled community service hours and then kept coming back after their hours were done. Aaliyah, now 13 and taller than she had been the day she asked if I was a new grandpa, appointed herself my teaching assistant. She stood beside me during the Wednesday sessions, helping younger children hold their tools correctly, explaining things with a patience that surprised me. She kept her plant journal religiously, filling notebook after notebook with observations and sketches and questions she would research at the library. "Grandpa Frank," she said one Wednesday afternoon as we were cleaning up after the students left. "You can be both," I said. "I am proof that you do not have to choose just one thing." She smiled at me with Doris's smile. That wide, unguarded expression that made the world feel warmer just by existing. By December of the second year, the garden was thriving. Not just the plants, the community, the connections, the web of relationships that had formed around this piece of land, like roots forming underground. Invisible but essential, and I was at the center of it. Not because I demanded to be, not because I needed to be, but because I had shown up, consistently, every single week, and the people around me had decided I was worth building around. I thought about Bryce sometimes. Not often. Not with the raw ache of those early months. More like a weather pattern you notice in the distance. Clouds on the horizon that may come your way, or may pass by. I wondered if he was okay. I wondered if Kendra's crypto dreams had come true, or crashed like so many others. I wondered if he ever thought about his father, the small-town principal who was apparently building something in the mountains of North Carolina. On a Friday afternoon in late December, I was closing up the tool shed after checking the winter covers on the beds. The sun was already setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of peach and violet. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out. A number I did not recognize. Area code 704. Charlotte, North Carolina. My heart knew before my brain did. My fingers went cold. The sunset suddenly seemed too bright, too sharp. I stood in the empty garden holding my phone, watching it ring. And I knew exactly who was on the other end. I knew. Because a father always knows. Even when his son has been silent for a year and a half. Even when the last words spoken between them were designed to destroy. A father always knows when his child is about to need something. I let it ring 3 more times. Then I answered, "Dad?" His voice was different. I noticed it immediately. The way you notice when a familiar instrument is out of tune. The arrogance was gone. That sharpness, that edge of contempt that had colored every conversation for the past decade, it was missing. In its place was something thinner. Something that trembled at the edges like a leaf in wind. "Bryce," I said. I did not say son. I did not say how are you. I just said his name and waited. I was not sure you would answer. Neither was I. A pause. I could hear him breathing. Short, shallow breaths. The kind a person takes when they are trying to hold themselves together long enough to get words out. Behind him, silence. No Kendra. No background noise. Just Bryce alone somewhere. Calling his father after 18 months of nothing. "How are you?" he asked. The question surprised me. Not because he asked it, but because it sounded genuine. Like he actually wanted to know. But I had learned something in the past year and a half. I had learned that genuine-sounding questions from Bryce often preceded requests that were anything but genuine. "I am fine," I said. "I am good, actually. The garden is doing well. Natalie is doing well. Life is quiet here." "That is good. That is really good, Dad." Another pause. Longer this time. I waited. I had learned how to wait. Doris taught me that. She said silence was not something you had to fill. Sometimes silence was just the space between one truth and the next. "Listen," Bryce finally said. "I need to talk to you about something. I know I do not have the right to call you after everything I said. I know that. But things have gotten bad, Dad. Really bad." I sat down on the bench beside the tool shed. The garden was dark around me. The winter covers on the beds looked like sleeping animals in the fading light. Everything was still, except my heart, which was beating in a way it had not in months. "Tell me," I said, and he did. The words came out in a rush, like he had been rehearsing them for days, and was afraid he would lose his nerve if he slowed down. The crypto fund had collapsed. Not just declined. Collapsed entirely. Kendra's brother, the one running the operation, had been charged with securities fraud. The fund was frozen. Investors were suing. Everything Bryce and Kendra had put in, over $200,000, was gone. Not just the money I had refused to give him, their savings. Kendra's inheritance. The equity from their condo. "Kendra's father cut us off," Bryce said. His voice cracked. "He blames me. Says I should have done due diligence. Says I am responsible for losing his daughter's money. And Kendra, He trailed off. "She what?" "She filed for divorce last month. She says I ruined her life. She is taking the condo, the car, everything. Her lawyer is better than anything I can afford." I sat with this information. I let it settle into the space between us. I did not feel what I expected to feel. There was no satisfaction in hearing that Bryce's world had fallen apart. No vindication. No sense of justice served. There was only sadness. The particular sadness of watching your child suffer the consequences of choices you warned them about. "I am sorry to hear that, Bryce," I said. And I meant it. "Dad, I need help." His voice dropped lower. "Urgent now. I need $60,000. Just to keep afloat through the divorce. Lawyer fees. A security deposit on an apartment. Enough to survive until I find another job. I lost my position at the firm 3 months ago. They let me go when the scandal broke. $60,000. I thought about my savings account. The retirement bonus. The house sale money. Carefully managed over a year and a half of modest living. I had enough. That was the terrible part. I had enough to help him, Bryce. I said carefully. "Have you talked to a financial advisor? Someone who can help you restructure your debts?" "There are programs. I do not need a financial advisor, Dad. I need money. My money. The family money. You are sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars from selling the house I grew up in, and you are spending it on what? Tomatoes? A garden? You are playing farmer while your son is losing everything." There it was. The shift. The moment where the vulnerability gave way to entitlement. The moment where the trembling voice hardened back into the voice I recognized. The voice that believed I owed him something for the crime of being his father. "I am not playing anything," I said. My voice was steady. I surprised myself with how steady it was. A year ago, this conversation would have gutted me. I would have folded. I would have opened my insurance in times, I would have opened my wallet and tried to buy back his love the way I had been tempted to do my entire life. But something was different now. I had people who loved me without a price tag. I had a community that valued my presence, not my bank account. I had learned what unconditional felt like, and this was not it. "I cannot give you $60,000, Bryce. Cannot or will not. Both." The silence that followed was sharp. I could feel his anger building through the phone like heat through a closed window. "After everything you put us through," he said. And his voice was tight now, controlled in that dangerous way. "After you walked out on Mom. After you moved across the country and abandoned us. After you chose some garden over your own family. This is what you do. You sit there in your little house in the mountains and you let your own son drown." I closed my eyes. The accusations were familiar. The same ones he had used 18 months ago. The same weapons he had been sharpening since I left Connecticut. Abandonment. Selfishness. The unforgivable crime of choosing my own survival over his comfort. I did not abandon you, I said quietly. Your mother passed away. I sold a house I could not live in alone. I moved to a place where my daughter lives because she asked me to. And I built a life here, a real life, with people who show up for me without conditions. Without conditions. He repeated it like it was poison. You mean without me? Say what you mean, Dad. I mean without manipulation. Without threats. Without someone telling me to forget I exist. And then calling 18 months later. Because they need money. Silence. I can help you find resources, I continued. Financial counseling. Legal aid programs. I can help you think through options. But I am not going to transfer $60,000 into your account and pretend that is the same as being your father. Money is not love, Bryce. I learned that the hard way. You know what? His voice was blade thin now. Ice cold. You are exactly who Kendra said you were. A small man with small ambitions who hides behind a garden because he is too scared to live in the real world. You are no father of mine. You never were. The line went dead. I sat on the bench in the dark garden for a long time. The phone screen faded to black in my hand. Above me, stars were coming out one by one over the mountains, indifferent and eternal. A dog barked somewhere in the neighborhood. A car passed on the street, its headlights sweeping briefly across the garden gate before disappearing. I did not cry. I did not shake. I did not feel the ground dropping from beneath me the way I had 18 months ago in that empty kitchen. Instead, I felt something strange and unexpected. I felt solid, like the earth beneath the bench, like the roots of the plants sleeping under their winter covers. Bruised, yes. Saddened, yes. But not broken. Not anymore. I pulled out my phone and dialed Doris. Doris answered after 2 rings. Her voice was alert despite the hour, like she had been expecting this call without knowing it. Franklin? What happened? I told her everything. Not the details of Bryce's financial collapse, those felt private even now, but the shape of the conversation. The ask. The refusal. The familiar pattern of vulnerability giving way to accusation. The final words that were designed to sever. Doris listened without interrupting. I could hear her breathing, steady and even, like a metronome keeping time while I stumbled through the telling. When I finished, the silence between us was not empty. It was full. Full of her thinking. Full of her choosing words. The way she chose seeds. Carefully. With attention to what would actually grow. Franklin, she said finally. You did not lose him today. I know, I said. But I did not know. Not fully. You lost him a long time ago. Maybe years before you even realized it. Today you just stopped pretending otherwise. And that is different from losing. That is letting go. I sat with those words. They landed in the exact place that needed them. The place between guilt and grief, where I had been living for 18 months without knowing it. I keep thinking, I said slowly, that there is something I should have said differently. Some combination of words that would have made him hear me instead of just hearing what he wanted from me. There is not, Doris said. Simply. Without cruelty. Some people are not listening for understanding. They are listening for an opening. A crack in your wall they can push through. And when they cannot find one, they get angry. That anger is not about you, Franklin. It is about them realizing that you are no longer breakable. I thought about that. About being unbreakable. It did not feel heroic. It felt exhausting. It felt like something I had earned through pain rather than strength. Do you think I am wrong? I asked. For saying no? I think you are asking the wrong person, Doris said. Because I watched my sister give her son money every time he asked for 20 years. And you know what he learned? That asking worked. He never learned how to stand on his own. Because she never let him fall. She thought she was being loving. She was being afraid. There is a difference. What happened to him? He is 52 years old, and still asking. And she is 74, and tired, and broke, and wondering where all that love went. Doris paused. You are not her, Franklin, and your boy is not mine to judge. But you drew a line tonight, and lines are not the same as walls. A wall keeps everyone out. A line just says, this is where I end, and you begin. After we hung up, I sat on my porch in the dark. The mountains were invisible at this hour, just an absence of stars along the horizon where the peaks blocked the sky. The air smelled like cold earth and wood smoke from someone's fireplace down the street. I thought about Margaret, about what she would say if she were sitting beside me in her rocking chair the way she used to on summer evenings, a glass of sweet tea in her hand, her feet bare on the worn porch boards. She had a way of cutting through my spiraling, a single sentence that could stop me mid-thought and redirect everything, and I could hear her now, as clearly as if she were actually here, as if 5 years of absence had not dulled her voice in my memory at all. Franklin, you cannot love someone into being a good person. They have to choose that themselves. All you can do is choose who you are while you wait to see if they ever will. I said it out loud. Just once. Just to hear it in the night air. To let it exist outside of my memory and become real in this new life I was building. Margaret had known something about Bryce long before I did. She had seen the entitlement growing in him the way she could see blight forming on a leaf before it spread. She had warned me once, years ago, that I was too quick to give and too slow to ask why he was always taking. But I had not listened. I was too busy being the good father, the generous father, the father who never said no because saying no felt like failing. Saying no tonight did not feel like failing. It felt like the first honest thing I had said to Bryce in years. I called Natalie. It was late, past 10, but she answered immediately. Like Doris, like Rachel, in a different story, daughters answer when their fathers call. It is something built into them, something beautiful and unearned and sacred. Dad, are you okay? Bryce called, I said. He asked for money. I said no. He said some things. What things? The same things he said last time. That I am not his father. That I never was. Natalie was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, good. Good? Good that you said no. Good that you held your ground. Dad, I have been waiting for you to stop letting him use you. I have been watching it for years, since before Mom died. He takes and calls it love. And it is not love. It is extraction. He is still my son, I said. He is. And you are still his father. But being a father does not mean you have to bleed every time he is thirsty. Her voice softened. I am proud of you. I know. That sounds strange. A daughter being proud of her father. But I am. You chose yourself tonight. And that is not selfish. That is survival. After we hung up, I walked into my backyard. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the garden I had built over the past year. The raised beds stood in neat rows. The winter covers were tucked securely. The dogwood tree in the center reached its bare branches toward the sky like an old man stretching after a long sleep. Everything was still alive under there. Dormant, yes. Resting through the cold months. But alive. The roots were deep and strong and waiting for spring. The seeds I had planted in autumn were sleeping in the dark soil. Patient, unhurried, trusting that warmth would return. I was like that garden. That was the thought that came to me standing there in the moonlight with the mountains rising dark and silent around me. I was dormant, not dead, resting through a winter that Bryce had made. But my roots were deep now, deeper than they had ever been in Connecticut. Deeper than they had been when my entire sense of worth depended on whether my son returned my phone calls. Bryce could say whatever he wanted. He could call me dead. He could declare me no father of his. He could use his anger like a blade, and try to cut me away from my own story. But you cannot kill something whose roots go deep enough. You cannot destroy what has already learned how to survive winter. I stood in my garden under the moon, and I let the last of the hurt pass through me like cold air. Then, I went inside. I made tea. I sat at my kitchen table, the one with 2 chairs because I had never needed 4 here in Asheville, and I rested. Tomorrow was Sunday. The garden would be waiting. Doris would be waiting. Raymond and Aaliyah, and the whole community of people who had chosen me would be waiting, and I would show up. The way I always did. The way I always would. 3 months passed without a word from Bryce. I did not count the days. I did not check my phone hoping to see his name. I did not lie awake, wondering if he was all right. At least, not often. A father never stops wondering entirely, but the wondering became quieter over time. Like a radio turned low in another room. Still there. Still playing. But no longer the only thing you could hear. Instead, I counted seasons. The garden taught me to measure time differently. Not in days or weeks or missed phone calls, but in what was growing, what was blooming, what was ready to harvest, what needed planting for the next cycle. January was for planning. Doris and I spent Sunday mornings at her kitchen table, with seed catalogs spread between us like maps to a country we were inventing together. She circled things in red pen. I made spreadsheets on notebook paper. Raymond looked at our plans and calculated irrigation needs without being asked. February was for starting seeds indoors. I lined my windowsills with small pots, each one labeled in Aaliyah's careful handwriting because she insisted on helping even when there was school the next morning. The house smelled like damp soil and possibility. Green shoots appeared within days, reaching toward the glass like they knew the sun was out there waiting for them. March was for the earth to thaw. We pulled back the winter covers and found the soil dark and rich and ready. The garlic I had planted in November was already pushing green spears through the surface. The perennial herbs were waking up. The garden was alive again, and so was I. By April, the beds were full. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, beans, cucumbers, kale, collards, lettuce in 6 varieties. The flower section Doris had insisted on was erupting in color. Zinnias and marigolds and sunflowers that grew taller every day like children marking their height on a doorframe. The education section was ready for Natalie's students to return, and new families were showing up every Sunday, drawn by the article from last year, or by word of mouth, or simply by the sight of people working together in a world that so often worked alone. May brought the farmer's market. It was Raymond's idea. "We grow more than we eat," he said one Sunday. "We should sell the extra, put the money back into the garden." So we set up a table every Saturday morning at the downtown market. Frank's Garden, the sign read, though I had argued it should say Sunday Garden instead. Doris overruled me. "People buy from people," she said. "They want a name. They want a face. Give them yours." I stood behind that table every Saturday and sold vegetables to strangers who became familiar. A woman who came every week for cherry tomatoes. A chef from a downtown restaurant who bought herbs in bulk. A young father who brought his daughter so she could pick out one vegetable she had never tried before. They learned my name. They asked about the garden. Some of them joined. June was when the news about Kendra reached me. Natalie mentioned it casually during a Sunday phone call. The way you mention weather or traffic, not because it was unimportant, but because she was testing how much weight I could hold. "The divorce is final," she said. "Kendra got everything. The condo, both cars, their joint accounts. Bryce is living in a studio apartment in South Charlotte. He lost his job at the firm months ago. I do not think he has found anything new." I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, looking out the window at my backyard garden. The tomato plants were heavy with fruit. The basil was fragrant enough to smell from inside. "How do you know all this?" I asked. He texted me. Once. About a month ago. Just said things were bad. I told him I was sorry, but I did not offer more than that. "I did not know if you would want me to." You can have whatever relationship with your brother you choose, I said. That is between you and him, I know. But I want you to know that I chose you first. I will always choose you first. I thanked her and we talked about other things. Her students. A recipe she wanted to try. A hike she had done the previous weekend on the Blue Ridge Parkway. Normal things. The things that fill a life when crisis is not consuming it. But after we hung up, I sat on my porch and thought about Bryce in a studio apartment in South Charlotte. Alone. Unemployed. Divorced. Everything he had built with Kendra. The status, the appearances, the carefully curated life that required looking down on everyone beneath them. All of it was gone. I did not feel satisfaction. I want to be clear about that. There was no sense of justice or karma or any of those words people use to describe the pleasure of watching someone else suffer the consequences of their choices. I just felt tired. Tired of the pattern. Tired of Bryce's life being something that happened to me instead of something that happened beside me. Doris must have seen something in my face that Sunday because she pulled me aside after the meal while Raymond was loading leftover containers into people's cars. Something is sitting on you, she said. It was not a question. Kendra and Bryce are divorced. He lost everything. Doris nodded slowly. She did not look surprised. And how does that make you feel? Sad, I said. Just sad. Not for what happened between us. Just sad that he chose a life that was always going to end this way, and he could not see it. Or would not. Doris put her hand on my arm. Her grip was warm and certain. You are allowed to feel sad for him, and still protect yourself. Those are not opposites, Franklin. Grief and boundaries can live in the same heart. I know, I said. Do you? Because you have that look again. The one you had when you first showed up at my fence. The look of a man wondering if he should reach out. I will not reach out, I said. And I meant it. He knows where I am. He knows my number. If he wants to find me, he can. But I am done crossing bridges he keeps burning. Doris squeezed my arm once more and then released it. Good. Now come help me wrap up this cornbread before Aaliyah eats the entire pan. Summer deepened. The garden hit its peak. Every bed overflowed. The sunflowers grew past 7 feet tall, their faces tracking the sun from east to west like a slow audience watching a performance. Children from the Wednesday program ran between rows, amazed at how tall the corn had gotten since their last visit. The farmer's market table was so full on Saturdays that we needed a second table and then a third. And one Sunday afternoon in late July, Natalie drove up to the garden while I was staking tomatoes. I heard her car and looked up with a wave, expecting her alone the way she always came for visits. But she was not alone. A man stepped out of the passenger side. Tall, broad-shouldered, with kind eyes and a posture that suggested both strength and gentleness. He looked at the garden with genuine interest, not the polite scanning of someone making small talk, but actual curiosity. Then he looked at Natalie, and his whole face softened. Natalie walked toward me, her hand reaching back, and the man took it. Their fingers intertwined easily, naturally, like they had been doing it for a while, long enough for it to become habit. "Dad," Natalie said, and her smile was brighter than I had seen in years. "I want you to meet someone." Ethan Cross stood in front of me with a handshake that told me everything I needed to know about him before he said a single word. It was firm but not aggressive. Steady, but not performative. The handshake of a man who had nothing to prove and knew it. "Mr. Holloway," he said, "Natalie has told me so much about you. And about this garden. It is even more impressive in person." He was 32. A structural engineer for a firm in Asheville that specialized in sustainable building. He had broad shoulders and calm brown eyes, and a way of standing that suggested both strength and patience. The kind of man who builds things designed to last. "Call me Frank," I said. Mr. Holloway was the principal. "I am just a gardener now." Ethan smiled. "With all due respect, sir, from what Natalie's told me, You are a lot more than just a gardener. I liked him immediately. Not because of the compliment, but because of the way he looked at Natalie while he said it. His eyes moved to her, the way a compass needle moves to north. Involuntary. Certain. Like she was the fixed point his whole world oriented around. I knew that look. I had worn it myself for 34 years. Every time Margaret walked into a room, every time she laughed, every time she stood in her garden with dirt on her hands and sunlight in her hair, and I thought, how did someone like me end up with someone like her? Would you like to see the garden? I asked. Very much, Ethan said. And he meant it. That was the thing about him. He meant everything he said. There was no performance in him. No trying to impress the father. Just genuine curiosity about the thing that mattered to the woman he loved. I walked them through the beds. Ethan asked questions. Real questions. About the irrigation system Raymond had built. About the soil composition. About the structural integrity of the raised beds. He knelt down and examined the joints where the boards met. The way an engineer does when he is evaluating craftsmanship. This is solid work, he said, running his hand along the frame. Who built these? Raymond and I said. Raymond is an electrician, but he builds like a carpenter. You can tell. These will last 20 years at least. Natalie watched us from a few steps back. Her arms crossed, her face holding a smile. She was trying not to let grow too large. She looked like a woman watching two pieces of her life fit together for the first time. Over the next few weeks, Ethan became a regular presence. Not at every Sunday garden session. His work schedule did not always allow it, but often enough that people started to know him. Raymond respected him immediately. The way men who work with their hands respect other men who understand materials and structures. Doris approved of him within minutes. He listens. When Natalie talks, she told me. That is rarer than people think. Aaliyah, now 14, and entering that phase where everything was either deeply embarrassing or intensely fascinating, declared Ethan acceptable after their third meeting. Coming from Aaliyah, that was the highest possible compliment. I watched Ethan and Natalie together. The way I imagine a gardener watches a plant that is thriving. With quiet satisfaction. With the understanding that you did not cause this growth. You just provided good soil. Natalie was flourishing. She had always been strong, always been capable. But with Ethan, she was something else too. She was free. Free to be soft. Free to lean on someone. Free to need something without apologizing for the needing. In early September, Ethan called me. Not Natalie. Ethan. On a Wednesday evening, when I was cleaning up after the garden classroom session, the children had gone home with muddy knees and proud faces, carrying seedlings they had grown from scratch. Frank, he said. Do you have a minute? Of course. I want to ask Natalie to marry me. The words landed in my chest, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Warm and sudden, and exactly right. And I want to ask your permission first, Ethan continued. I know it is old-fashioned. I know Natalie would say she does not need anyone's permission to make her own choices. And she is right. But I respect you, Frank. I respect what you mean to her. And I want you to know that I see her. I really see her. And I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure she knows it. I sat down on the bench beside the tool shed. The same bench where I had sat in the dark after Bryce's last phone call. The same bench where I had felt the earth hold me up when my son tried to tear me down. Now I was sitting here hearing a different man, a good man, asking to join my family. Ethan, I said, and my voice was not steady. I did not try to make it steady. You do not need my permission, but you have my blessing. Completely. Without reservation. Thank you, sir. Take care of her. I said. Show up for her. That is all I ask. Just show up. Always, he said. I promise. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday evening in late September, Natalie called me. I was sitting on my porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. The sky turned to fire along the ridgeline. Dad, she said. And she was crying. but not the kind of crying that comes from pain, the kind that comes from overflow, from a heart too full to hold everything quietly. He proposed, she whispered. In the garden. He proposed in our garden, Dad. He got down on one knee between the tomato beds, and he asked me, and I said yes. I closed my eyes. The garden. Of course. Of course he had done it there. Because Ethan paid attention. Because he understood that the garden was not just a plot of land. It was a symbol of everything good that had happened to this family in the past 3 years. I know, sweetheart, I said. I know. You knew? He called me 3 weeks ago. Asked for my blessing. She laughed through her tears. Of course he did. Of course he did. That is so Ethan. We talked for a while. About rings and timelines and the logistics of planning a wedding. Natalie talked fast the way she always did when she was excited, her words tumbling over each other like water over stones. I mostly listened. I let her joy wash over me like something I had been waiting for without knowing it. Then she said the thing that changed everything. Dad, I want to get married in the garden. Your garden. The one you built. I did not speak for a long moment. I could not. The words were too large. The meaning was too deep. My daughter wanted to begin her marriage in the place where I had rebuilt my life. She wanted to walk toward her future through the soil I had turned when I had nowhere else to go. Natalie, I finally said. My voice broke on her name, and I did not care. It is perfect, Dad. Everything you planted, everything you grew, the flowers, the paths, the community. I want to stand in the middle of all of that and promise my life to someone, because that garden is proof. Proof that broken things can become beautiful. Proof that starting over is not giving up. It is just finding better ground. I sat on my porch with the phone pressed to my ear and the mountains dark against a sky full of stars, and I cried the way I had cried on Christmas night in Doris's bathroom. Not from loss, from the overwhelming recognition that everything, every single hard and beautiful thing that had happened in the past 3 years had been leading here, to this garden, to this moment, to my daughter choosing to begin her life in the place where I had found mine. 6 weeks before the wedding, Natalie sat down beside me on the wooden bench at the edge of the garden. It was a bench I had built the previous spring from reclaimed oak. Raymond helped with the joints. Aaliyah carved her initials into the underside when she thought no one was watching. It was one of my favorite places in the garden, positioned where you could see the entire plot stretching out in rows of green and gold, the mountains rising blue behind it all. Natalie did not say anything at first. She just sat, hands in her lap, looking straight ahead at the sunflowers that were beginning to bow their heavy heads toward the ground, their season nearly over. I knew something was coming. Natalie had a way of preparing me for difficult things by first making sure I was grounded, by sitting close, by letting the silence do the work of saying, I am here. Whatever comes next, I am here. Dad, she said finally, I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen before you respond. All right, I said. I invited Bryce to the wedding. The words landed the way cold water lands when you are not expecting it. A shock that takes your breath and then settles into something your body has to accept because there is no other choice. Okay, I said. Because she had asked me to listen. He is still my brother, Natalie continued. Her voice was steady but careful. Chosen. I know what he did. I know what he said. I know how much he hurt you. And I chose you, Dad. I will always choose you. But he is my brother. We grew up together. And I thought. She paused, gathered herself. You thought what? I asked gently. I thought he should see. I thought he should see what you built here. What he gave up. What this garden looks like when 200 people show up to celebrate something beautiful. She turned to look at me. Her eyes were fierce and tender at the same time. I want him to see what real family looks like. And I want him to see that you are happy. That you did not just survive what he did to you. You thrived. I looked at the garden, The beds Raymond and I had built. The education section where Natalie's students learned. The names of things that grow. The flower section Doris insisted on because beauty, she said, was never optional. The shed where we stored tools and dreams and years of quiet labor. Bryce was going to see all of this. Bryce was going to walk into this garden and see his father surrounded by people who loved him. People who chose him. People who called him grandpa and friend and neighbor and family. Does he know? I asked. About the garden? About the Ellingtons? I caught myself. About Doris and Raymond and everyone? No, Natalie said. He knows I am getting married. He knows it is in Asheville. He does not know the details. He does not know about your life here. He thinks you are still alone. He thinks you are still the man he left standing in that kitchen 3 years ago. Something about that image. Bryce still picturing me alone in that empty house. Still believing his rejection had destroyed me. Stirred something complicated in my chest. Not anger exactly. Not satisfaction. Something closer to pity. He had no idea. What if he causes a scene? I said. He will not. He is broken, Dad. Natalie's voice softened. Whatever fight he had in him, Kendra took it with her when she left. He is not the same person who laughed at you on the phone. I do not know who he is now, but I think he deserves the chance to see what he missed. I sat with this for a long time. The sun was moving behind the mountains. The garden was emptying out as people headed home from the Sunday session. Doris's voice carried from somewhere near the flower beds, telling someone about the proper way to deadhead roses. Let me think about it, I said. That night, I called Raymond. Not Doris. Raymond. Because sometimes you need the kind of counsel that comes without philosophy. The kind that comes from a man who works with his hands and speaks in short, direct sentences. Natalie invited Bryce to the wedding, I said. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then, how do you feel about that? I do not know. Scared, maybe. Which is strange because I do not think I am actually afraid of him. I think I am afraid of going backward, of letting him pull me back into that version of myself, the one who needed his approval to feel worthwhile. Frank, Raymond said, you have got 200 people who show up for you every week. 200 people who know your name and respect what you built. One angry man cannot take that away. Not unless you let him. I know. Do you? Because you sound like you are trying to convince yourself. I almost laughed. Raymond was not one for gentle delivery. Maybe I am. Then stop. You are not the man you were 3 years ago. You know that. I know that. Everyone in this community knows that. If Bryce shows up and sees what you became, that is his problem to deal with, not yours. I called Doris next. She answered with music playing in the background. Gospel. Something slow and warm. Franklin. What is on your mind? I told her about Natalie's decision. About Bryce coming. About my fear of regression. Doris was quiet. Then said, let him come. Let him see. The garden does not hide from storms, Franklin. It stands where it is planted, and it weathers what comes. That is all you have to do. Stand where you are planted. I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, turning their words over in my mind. Raymond's practicality. Doris's poetry. Both saying the same thing in different languages. You are not who you were. You do not have to be afraid of who you were. The next morning, I drove to Natalie's apartment before school. She opened the door in her teaching clothes, surprised to see me this early. It is your day, sweetheart, I said. If you want him there, I trust you. I trust your reasons. And I trust that whatever happens, the people in that garden love me enough to hold me up if I need it. Natalie hugged me. Hard. The way she used to hug me as a little girl, when she was proud of me for something. Thank you, Dad. One more thing, she said, pulling back but keeping her hands on my shoulders. Her eyes were shining. I want you to walk me down the aisle. Through the garden. Past everything you planted. Past the tomato beds and the sunflowers and the education section and the bench you built. I opened my mouth, but no words came. I want every step I take toward Ethan to walk me through what you grew. Because you grew something beautiful, Dad. And I want to walk through it on the most important day of my life. I want everyone to see it. I want Bryce to see it. I could not speak. I just nodded, pulled my daughter close, held her the way I wish I had held on to things that mattered 20 years ago. Before I learned what loss meant. Before I understood how quickly the people you love can disappear. Okay. I finally whispered into her hair. Okay, sweetheart. I will walk you through the garden. And somewhere inside me, in the quiet place where fear had lived for 3 years, something new took root. Not confidence exactly. Not bravery. Something gentler than those. Something that felt like readiness. Like the earth in early spring. Still cold, still uncertain, but ready to hold whatever was about to be planted in it. I woke at 5 o'clock on the morning of my daughter's wedding. Not from an alarm, from something deeper. Some internal clock that knew today was different. That today required me to be present from the very first moment of light. The house was dark. I dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt. Work clothes. Because before I could be the father of the bride, I needed to be the gardener one last time. I needed to walk through what I had built before it became something else. Before 200 people filled it with celebration and all the beautiful chaos of a life being joined to another life. I stepped outside into November darkness. The air was sharp enough to sting my lungs, but clean enough to make me feel alive. The mountains were invisible. Just an absence against the sky where stars ended and earth began. No sound except my footsteps on the sidewalk and the distant calling of an owl somewhere in the trees behind the church. I reached the garden gate at 5:15. The padlock was cold in my fingers. I turned the key and stepped inside and stood still. The garden was ready. Raymond had strung lights along every fence post and between the oak trees. Dark wires now. But tonight, they would turn this place into something from a story. Doris had arranged flowers at the end of every bed. Blooms from our own garden mixed with arrangements from the florist downtown. White chairs sat in neat rows on either side of a center aisle that wound through the heart of the garden. I walked that aisle in the dark. Slowly. The way I would walk it again in a few hours, with my daughter on my arm. Each step took me past something I had planted. Past the bed where my first tomatoes grew. Past the spot where Doris had asked me to come on a Sunday morning. Past the bench where Natalie told me Bryce was coming. Past the raised beds Raymond and I built that first spring. I stopped in the center. Right where the aisle met the small platform Raymond had built for the ceremony. And I thought about another dark room 3 years ago. A kitchen. A dead phone. The silence of a life that had emptied itself of everything worth holding. 3 years. That was all. 3 years between standing in darkness with nothing and standing in darkness with everything. The same man, the same hands, but different soil beneath my feet. Better soil. Soil that had chosen me back. The sky began to lighten. Not sunrise yet. Just the promise of it. A thinning of darkness along the mountain ridge. And as the light grew, the garden revealed itself piece by piece. First the outlines of the beds. Then the colors of autumn flowers. Then the white chairs catching the first pale rays. It was beautiful. Not in the polished way of expensive venues. Beautiful in the honest way that only real things can be, because you can see the effort in it. Anyway, you can see the love. Doris arrived at 6:30. I heard her before I saw her. The creak of the gate. The soft humming of a hymn. "You are here early," she said. Could not sleep. She set down 2 enormous pots on the serving table. "Feels like our daughter is getting married. Not just yours." I looked at this woman who had seen me crying in my tomato beds 3 years ago and decided I was worth knowing. "She is," I said. "She is ours." Raymond arrived at 7 with his truck full of equipment. We worked together in silence, passing tools back and forth without asking. Aaliyah arrived at 8 in her bridesmaid dress. 15 years old now, tall and elegant. She ran toward me, heels in one hand. "Grandpa Frank." She hugged me tight. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," I admitted. She grinned. "Do not be. Everything is going to be perfect." By 10, the garden was transformed. Lights glowing softly, flowers arranged, musicians setting up under the oak canopy, and people began arriving in waves. Sunday, garden members first, then neighbors, then colleagues and friends from across the state, all stepping through the gate with the same expression of wonder, like they were entering somewhere sacred. By noon, 200 chairs were filled. 200 people sitting in a garden that started as a weed-choked lot behind an old church. 200 people surrounded by things I had planted with hands that used to shake from loneliness. I stood at the end of the aisle in my suit. The one Doris helped me choose, because she said a man walking his daughter through a garden needed to look like he belonged in both worlds. Raymond stood beside me as an usher, though really he was there because I needed his steady presence. "You good?" he asked quietly. "I am good," I said. And then I saw him. At the far edge of the garden, near the gate, a figure appeared. Alone. No partner. No family beside him. Just a man in a suit that did not quite fit. His hair thinner than I remembered. His shoulders narrower, carrying the weight of someone who had been reduced by life, instead of built by it. Bryce. He stood at the gate the way I had stood at this same gate 3 years ago. Hesitant. Uncertain. Like he was not sure he had the right to enter. Our eyes met, across 200 chairs, and 3 years of silence. And I understood something. He was not here to fight. He was not here to take. He was here because his sister had asked. And for the first time in his life, he had chosen to show up for someone else. But I could not think about Bryce right now. Because somewhere behind me, Natalie was waiting. And I had a garden to walk her through. I turned away from Bryce and walked toward the back of the garden where a small tent had been set up for the bridal party. Each step away from my son and toward my daughter felt like a choice made visible. Not a rejection, just a direction. Today belonged to Natalie. Everything else could wait. She was standing inside the tent when I arrived. Alone. She had asked everyone else to give her a moment with her father before the walk. The tent flap was open, and afternoon light poured in, catching the lace of her dress, the small flowers woven into her hair, the way her hands were clasped together in front of her, the way they did when she was trying not to cry. "Dad," she said. And then she could not say anything else, because her face crumpled in the way faces do when joy becomes too heavy to carry gracefully. "I know," I said. "I know, sweetheart." I took her hands. They were shaking. So were mine. We stood there for a moment, father and daughter, trembling together in a tent at the edge of a garden. And I thought about every moment that had led to this one. Every Sunday morning, every seed planted, every time I had chosen to show up instead of giving up. "You look like your mother," I said. Because she did. Margaret's eyes. Margaret's smile. Margaret's way of standing, like the world, was something she could handle. Natalie laughed through her tears. "Mom would have loved this. The garden. All of it." "She would have," I agreed. "She would have said it needed more roses. She always said everything needed more roses." We laughed together. A small shared moment of grief and gratitude woven together the way they always are when someone you love is missing from a day they should have seen. The music changed. The string quartet shifted from something ambient to something deliberate. A melody I recognized but could not name. Something about beginnings. Something that said, "It is time." "Ready?" I asked. Natalie squeezed my hands, wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders. "Ready." I offered her my arm, and she took it. Her grip was firm, anchoring. And together, we stepped out of the tent and into the garden. 200 people stood as we appeared. The rustle of 200 bodies rising from their chairs created a sound like wind through leaves. Faces turned toward us. Some I knew deeply. Doris in the second row, already crying, clutching a handkerchief she had probably been holding since dawn. Raymond beside her, chin up, eyes wet but refusing to fall. Aaliyah next to him, beaming, her phone held up to record this moment for reasons only a 15-year-old would understand. Then faces. I knew less well, but who knew me? Sunday garden members. Wednesday classroom parents. Farmers market regulars. Neighbors. The clerk from the hardware store. The reporter who had written the article. The councilwoman who had approved our expansion. 200 people who had watched this garden grow from weeds into something worth celebrating. We began to walk. Slowly. One step at a time. The aisle wound through the garden like a story, and that was exactly what Natalie had wanted. She wanted me to walk her through the narrative of the past 3 years. Through every chapter. Through every season. The first section we passed was the original tomato bed. The one I had dug in my first weeks of loneliness. The one that brought Doris to my fence. The plants were bare now, November having stripped them to stalks, but they were still there. Still rooted. Still holding their place in the earth. Next, the herb section where I had taught Aaliyah about basil and tomatoes. About plants that make each other better. About friends. The basil was gone for the season, but someone had placed small potted rosemary along the edges, their evergreen branches fragrant in the cool air. Then the raised beds Raymond and I built. Solid oak. Sturdy joints. 20-year beds, Ethan had said. I ran my free hand along the edge of one as we passed. The wood was smooth from seasons of hands gripping it. The education section came next. The small beds where Natalie's students learned to grow things. Where Jalen planted his seedling and came back every week to check on it. Where children discovered that patience and care could transform nothing into something alive. Finally, the flower section. Doris's insistence. Beauty is never optional, she had said. Chrysanthemums and late-season asters bloomed in bronze and purple and gold, surrounding us with color as we approached the platform where Ethan waited. With every step, I felt the garden holding me up. Not just the ground beneath my feet, but the meaning of it. 3 years of showing up. 3 years of choosing this community over the loneliness Bryce had offered me. 3 years of putting my hands in the dirt and discovering that the dirt put something back into me. People were clapping. Not just standing. Clapping. I had not expected that. The applause rippled through the rows like rainfall, and I realized with a start that they were not clapping only for Natalie. They were clapping for both of us. For the father and the daughter and the garden that connected them. For the story they had watched unfold over 3 years of Sundays. Doris was openly sobbing now, gripping Raymond's arm. Raymond was nodding at me, slow and certain, the way he did when he approved of something. Aaliyah was cheering. The Wednesday children who had been given seats near the front were bouncing in their chairs. We reached the platform. Ethan stood there in a dark suit, his eyes locked on Natalie with that look I had seen from the first day. That compass needle certainty. That involuntary north. I stopped. Turned to face my daughter. She was crying and smiling at the same time, and she had never looked more like her mother than in that moment. Take care of my garden, I said to Ethan, and he understood. He understood that I was not talking about the plants. Always, sir, he said. His voice was steady. His eyes were clear. Always. I placed Natalie's hand in his. Let go. Stepped back. And it was done. The passing of something precious from one set of hands to another. The trust of a father who had learned, through years of loss and rebuilding, that love was not about holding on. It was about knowing when to let go and trusting that what you planted would continue to grow. I took my seat in the front row. Doris took my hand immediately. Raymond's hand found my shoulder, and from that anchored place, surrounded by people who had chosen me, I watched my daughter marry the man she loved in the garden I had built from nothing. The ceremony was beautiful. Simple words spoken honestly. Vows written by hand and read through tears. A kiss that made 200 people cheer. But through it all, I was aware of a figure at the edge of my vision, standing at the back, behind the last row of chairs. Not sitting. Not participating. Bryce. Watching everything. His face was tight. His eyes were red. His hands hung at his sides like he did not know what to do with them. He looked like a man watching something through a window he could not open. Something beautiful and warm and alive that he had once had the chance to be part of. And for a moment, just a moment, our eyes met again across the garden. Father and son. 3 years of silence between us, like a field lying fallow. I did not smile. I did not frown. I just looked at him, and then I turned back to Natalie and Ethan, and I let the joy of this moment fill the space where pain used to live. The reception unfolded the way celebrations do when the people hosting them have thought of every detail with love instead of obligation. String lights came alive as the sun descended behind the mountains, casting the garden in a warm amber glow that made everything look softer, kinder. Like the world was showing its best face for one evening. The band played jazz and folk and old Motown songs that got people onto the makeshift dance floor between the flower beds. Doris danced with Raymond, her head barely reaching his shoulder, both of them moving with a rhythm that came from years of being in the same room together. Aaliyah pulled Ethan onto the floor and tried to teach him a TikTok dance, and his good-natured failure made everyone laugh. Natalie danced with everyone. With Ethan. With Doris. With the Wednesday children who stomped on her dress hem and did not care. I danced with my daughter during the father-daughter song, a slow melody that Margaret would have chosen. Natalie rested her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for being here, Dad. For all of this, there is nowhere else I would be," I said. And that was the truest thing I had ever spoken. After the dance, I stood near the food table, catching my breath. Raymond brought me water without being asked. Sunday garden members came by to shake my hand, to hug me, to tell me how beautiful the ceremony was. A woman I recognized from the Wednesday program said, "Mr. Frank, my daughter planted those marigolds along the aisle. She cried when she saw them today." I was surrounded, not just by people, by proof. Proof that showing up matters. Proof that small, consistent acts of love accumulate into something larger than any single gesture could ever be. And the whole time, Bryce watched. I was aware of him the way you are aware of weather changing. He stood near the back, beside the bar table, holding a glass he never drank from. His eyes moved across the reception like someone reading a book in a language he was only beginning to understand. He watched the Wednesday children run to me and grab my hands, pulling me towards something they wanted to show me in the garden beds. He watched me kneel down to their level and listen with the same attention I would give an adult. He watched them call me Grandpa Frank with the ease of children who have known someone their whole lives. He watched Raymond approach me and grip my forearm the way brothers do. Watched the silent language between us, the nod, the half smile, the understanding that required no words. He watched Doris touch my shoulder as she passed, a gesture so natural and frequent that neither of us acknowledged it. The touch of family, the touch of someone who has held your hand through grief and would do it again without being asked. He watched Aaliyah sit beside me at the table and show me something on her phone, and he watched me put on my reading glasses to look at it, while she laughed at how close I had to hold the screen. Small moments, ordinary moments, the kind that only exist between people who have years of shared history. I knew he was watching. I did not perform for him. I did not exaggerate my happiness or my connections. I simply lived my life the way I had been living it for 3 years, and I let him see it. Then, during a pause between songs, when the crowd had thinned slightly as people moved toward dessert, Bryce crossed the garden. His steps were deliberate but unsteady, like a man walking toward something he was afraid would disappear if he moved too quickly. He stopped 3 feet in front of me, close enough to touch but not touching. His face was tight. His jaw worked, like he was chewing words he could not swallow. "Dad," he said. And his voice was nothing like the voice that had said, "Forget you exist," nothing like the voice that had laughed. This voice was small and broken, in the way that only genuine shame can make a voice. "Bryce," I said. "I did not know." He gestured vaguely at the garden, at the people, at everything surrounding us. "I did not know you had all this. I thought you were alone. I thought you were sitting in some apartment feeling sorry for yourself." I thought. He stopped, swallowed. "You thought I was suffering," I said quietly. "You thought your rejection had destroyed me." He flinched. "Yes, it almost did," I said honestly. 3 years ago it almost did. But then someone invited me to their table, and I said yes, and everything changed." Bryce looked around the reception, at the lights and the laughter and the people who moved around me with the easy familiarity of family. At Doris, who was watching us from across the garden with protective eyes. At Raymond, who had positioned himself nearby, not threatening, just present. Available. In case I needed him. "I was wrong," Bryce said. And the words seemed to cost him everything. His face contorted. His eyes filled. His hands, hanging at his sides, clenched and unclenched, like they were trying to hold something that kept slipping away. "I was so wrong, Dad. About everything. About you. About what mattered. About Kendra. About money. About all of it." I listened. I did not interrupt. I owed him that much. The space to say what he needed to say. "I lost everything," he continued. His voice was barely above a whisper now. "Kendra, the money, the job, the apartment, all of it. And the whole time I was losing it, I kept thinking about what you said, about how money is not love, about how I was using you, about how you deserved better." He looked directly at me. His eyes were the same eyes I had watched open for the first time in a hospital room 36 years ago. The same eyes that had looked at me with wonder when I carried him on my shoulders at the county fair. The same eyes. Just older. Just sadder. Just finally seeing clearly. "Dad." His voice broke. "I am sorry. I am so sorry for everything I said. For laughing at you. For calling you names. For treating you like you were nothing." His knees buckled. Not dramatically. Not for show. They simply gave way beneath the weight of what he was carrying. He dropped to the ground in front of me, his hands reaching for mine, tears streaming down his face. "Please," he whispered. "Please let me come home. I do not deserve it. I know I do not deserve it. But please, I am begging you." 2 holding people were around us. Some had noticed, some had not. The band was playing softly. Children were still laughing somewhere in the flower beds. Life was continuing the way it does, indifferent to the private earthquakes happening in its margins. I looked down at my son on his knees in the garden I had built. In the dirt I had turned. Among the roots I had planted. And I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not anger. Not vindication. Not even relief. Compassion. I reached down and took his hands. I pulled him up. Slowly. Gently. The way you lift a seedling from the earth when it needs to be replanted somewhere better. He came up shaking. His face wrecked. His suit dirty at the knees. I held his hands for a moment. Looked into those familiar, broken eyes. And I spoke. "You cannot come home," I said. "Not to what you destroyed. That home does not exist anymore. The man who stood in that kitchen waiting for you to love him, he is gone. I let him go a long time ago." Bryce's face crumpled further. His hands gripped mine tighter like he was holding on to the edge of something. "But," I said. And I let the word hang there. Let him hear that there was more. That this was not the end. You can start building something new. Something honest. Something that does not depend on money or guilt or old debts you think I owe you. He looked at me. Waiting. Barely breathing. That is what gardens teach you, Bryce. Everything dies in winter. Everything. The plants you tended, the ones you neglected, the ones you pulled up by the roots because you did not think they were worth keeping. All of it goes into the ground. But if the roots are still there, if something survived beneath the surface, spring comes back. Not the same as before. Never the same. But alive. I released one of his hands and placed mine against his chest. Over his heart. The way I had done when he was a small boy having nightmares, and I would sit on the edge of his bed and say, "Feel that? That means you are still here. That means you are still here." "I do not know if there are roots left between us," I said honestly. "You cut deep. You cut for years. But I am not going to be the one who says it is impossible. I am just going to say it is not going to be easy. And it is not going to look like it used to. And I cannot promise I will trust you the way a father should trust his son. You took that from me. You will have to earn it back." Bryce nodded. He could not speak. His face was wet and ruined, and for the first time in years, completely unguarded. No performance, no manipulation, no angle. Just a man standing in the wreckage of his own choices, finally seeing the cost. "Start with honesty," I said. "Start with showing up. Not when you need something. Not when life falls apart and you remember you have a father. Just showing up. Regularly. Without agenda. The way these people show up for me every Sunday." I gestured at the reception around us. The lights. The laughter. The garden that held all of it together. "That is all I ever wanted from you," I said quietly. "I never needed you to be successful or rich or impressive. I just needed you to show up. And you never did. Until today." Bryce wiped his face with the back of his hand. Drew a shaking breath. "I will," he said. "I will show up. I promise." "Do not promise me," I said. "Promises from you have not meant much in the past. Just do it. And if you do it long enough, maybe the roots will grow back." We stood there for a moment in the middle of the reception, two men connected by blood and separated by years of choices that could not be undone. The music played. People danced. Life continued around us with the beautiful indifference of a world that does not stop for individual pain. Then Doris appeared. She materialized beside us the way she always did, like she had been waiting in the wings for exactly the right moment to enter. She carried a plate in her hands. Full. Brisket and cornbread and greens and a slice of pie balanced on the edge. She did not look at me. She looked at Bryce. "You look hungry," she said simply. And she held out the plate. Bryce stared at it. At this woman he had never met offering him food he had not asked for. His mouth opened, closed. He did not know what to do with unexpected kindness. It was foreign to him. The language of someone giving without wanting something in return. "Take it," Doris said. Not unkind, just direct. The way she had been direct with me 3 years ago at my fence. The way she was direct with everyone who entered her orbit. "You are at a celebration. You should eat." Bryce took the plate. His hands were still trembling. "Thank you," he whispered. Raymond appeared next. Pulled a chair from a nearby table and set it down. Not at the family table. Not yet. But near it. Close enough to be included. Far enough to not presume. "Sit," Raymond said. One word. No judgment in it. Just an offering. Brite sat. I watched him there. Holding a plate of food given freely by a stranger. Sitting in a chair offered without condition. Surrounded by people who did not know his history, his failures, his cruelty. People who simply saw a man alone at a celebration and decided he should not be. And I understood something with a clarity that nearly brought me to my knees. This was exactly what Doris had done for me 3 years ago. She had seen a man alone. She had offered food. She had pulled up a chair. She had said, "Sit," without knowing my story. Without knowing my pain. Without needing me to earn it first. The circle was complete. Not perfectly. Not neatly. Life does not tie its knots in bows, but complete in the way that seasons are complete. Winter gives way to spring. Seeds become fruit. Strangers become family. And sometimes, if the roots survive, even the things you thought were dead find a way to push through the surface again. Natalie appeared. She had been watching from across the garden. I knew, because I knew my daughter. She approached Bryce slowly, the way you approach something fragile. He looked up from his plate, and his face when he saw his sister was something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Gratitude and shame and love and relief all tangled together. "Hey, big brother," Natalie said softly. She knelt beside his chair and took his free hand. "I am glad you came. You look beautiful," Bryce said. His voice was hoarse. "You look so happy." "I am," Natalie said. "I really am." She glanced at me, a look that said, "Are we okay?" And I nodded, because we were. Different than before. Changed by what had happened between us. But okay. The evening continued. Bryce ate his food. He sat in his chair at the edge of things. He did not try to insert himself into the celebration. He did not try to make it about him. By her, had be fell. By, harbrif, har, he, Bryce, by. He just sat and watched and ate, and let the warmth of this place wash over him the way it had washed over me 3 years before. I did not sit with him. That would come later, or it would not. I did not know, but I did not need to know tonight. Tonight was Natalie's. Tonight was about joy and beginnings, and the garden holding all of us together. Later, after the cake was cut and the bouquet was thrown, and Natalie and Ethan drove away in a car decorated with streamers, I found myself standing at the edge of the garden looking at the sky. Stars everywhere, mountains dark against them, the string lights still glowing behind me. Doris came to stand beside me. She did not say anything for a long time, just stood with her shoulder, touching mine, looking up at the same sky. "You gave him food," I finally said. "I gave a hungry man a plate," she corrected. "That is all. It was more than that. Maybe. But Franklin, that is what we do here. We feed people. We pull up chairs. We let them sit. The rest is up to them." I thought about Bryce in that chair. About the plate in his trembling hands. About the long road ahead of us. If there was a road at all. "Do you think he will come back?" I asked. "I do not know," Doris said honestly. "But the chair will be there if he does." The morning after the wedding, I woke to silence. Not the hollow silence of 3 years ago, the kind that pressed against your chest like a stone, but the gentle silence of a house that had finally exhaled. Sunlight came through the bedroom window in long golden sheets, warming the quilt Doris had sewn for my 65th birthday. I lay still for a moment, letting the night replay itself behind my closed eyelids. Bryce had stayed until midnight. He ate Doris's food. He shook Raymond's hand. He listened to Aaliyah talk about her plant journal with the same quiet amazement I had felt 3 years earlier when I first heard her voice over that fence. He did not ask for money. He did not make promises he could not keep. He simply sat in the chair that had been waiting for him. And for one evening, that was enough. I did not know if he would come back next Sunday. I did not know if the seed planted last night would survive its first frost. But I knew something I had not known 3 years ago. That was no longer my burden to carry. I dressed in my old gardening clothes, the faded khaki pants with soil permanently pressed into the knees, the flannel shirt Margaret bought me a decade ago, the boots that had walked every inch of that half-acre 1,000 times. The wedding decorations still hung in the garden when I arrived at 6 in the morning, string lights powered down, chairs stacked against the oak trees, flower petals scattered across the stone path like confetti. The earth had thrown for itself. I did not rush to clean. Instead, I walked. I walked the perimeter, the way I had walked it that very first Sunday morning, when Doris handed me a hoe and said nothing more than, "Start here." I touched the fence where Aaliyah had leaned at 12 years old, asking if I was a new grandpa. I passed the raised beds Raymond and I built with reclaimed lumber, the joints still tight, the wood weathered to a silver that caught morning light like metal. I stopped at the education beds. The small wooden signs Aaliyah had painted, tomato, basil, zinnia, were faded now, replaced twice over the years, each version slightly more artistic than the last. I thought of Jalen, the second grader who asked if a seed would remember him. He was in 5th grade now. His mother told me last month he had started his own container garden on their apartment balcony. 4 pots, tomatoes, and basil. That is what gardens teach you. You plant something, you water it, you protect it from wind and frost and drought, and then you release it. You let it grow in directions you never planned, in soil you never prepared, under skies you will never see. The harvest is never entirely yours. It belongs to everyone who ever knelt beside you in the dirt. By 8 o'clock, Doris appeared at the gate with 2 thermoses of coffee and a brown paper bag of biscuits. She wore her Sunday hat lavender, wide-brimmed, slightly crooked the way she always wore it. She handed me a thermos without speaking, and we sat on the bench Raymond had installed beneath the largest oak. The same bench where Natalie told me about Ethan, the same bench where I decided to let Bryce attend the wedding. "How do you feel?" Doris asked after a long silence. I considered the question honestly. "Like a garden in late October," I said. "The harvest is done, the beds are clearing, but the soil is still warm." She nodded as though that was exactly the right answer. "Good. Because we have a winter planning meeting next week, and I need your spreadsheet brain." I laughed. It came easily now, laughter. 3 years ago, it had felt like a foreign language. Now it was my mother tongue. At 10, Natalie and Ethan came to help dismantle the decorations. Natalie moved through the garden in a simple white t-shirt and jeans, her wedding dress packed away, her face still carrying the glow of yesterday. Ethan worked beside Raymond, folding chairs, coiling extension cords, stacking tables with the quiet efficiency of a man who understood that family was built in moments exactly like this. Natalie found me near the tomato beds, the original 3 raised beds I had built in September of my first year. The same beds where Ethan proposed. She stood beside me and slipped her arm through mine. "Mom would have loved this," she said. "She would have critiqued my spacing," I replied. Natalie laughed, then grew quiet. "Bryce texted me this morning. He said thank you." Just those 2 words. I nodded. 2 words. 3 years ago, his last words to me had been a command to forget I existed. Now, 2 words moving in the opposite direction. I did not know if they were the beginning of something or merely the echo of last night's emotion, but I received them the way I received rain in early spring. Grateful, patient, aware that one shower does not make a season. By noon the garden was restored to its ordinary beauty. No lights, no chairs, no white ribbons, just soil and stems and the quiet hum of insects navigating late autumn blooms. The community would return next Sunday. Aaliyah would bring her journal. Raymond would bring his terrible jokes. Doris would bring enough food for 40 people and pretend she had only made enough for 10, and I would be here. Not because I had nowhere else to go. I had a daughter in this city, a son-in-law who called me sir with genuine warmth, a community that numbered over 200. I would be here because this garden was the truest thing I had ever built, more lasting than a career, more honest than blood alone. I locked the gate at 12:30. The sun was high, and the sky was the particular blue that only western North Carolina offers in autumn, deep, endless, clean. I placed my hand on the fence post the way you might place your hand on a friend's shoulder. Then I walked home. If you are listening to this, and you feel forgotten if someone you love has told you that you no longer matter, that your presence is unwelcome, that your life's work amounts to nothing. I want you to hear me clearly. You are not what they say you are. You are not the silence they leave behind. You are the soil beneath everything. And soil does not stop being fertile because one season fails. Find your garden. It might be a literal plot of earth. It might be a community center, a church kitchen, a neighbor's porch, a classroom, a workshop. Find the place where your hands are useful and your presence is felt. Show up. Keep showing up. Let the roots go deep, and let the people who choose you become your harvest. My son told me to forget I existed. 3 years later, he knelt in my garden and begged me to let him back in. But here is what I need you to understand. My healing did not begin when he knelt. It began the morning I picked up a shovel and decided that my life was still worth cultivating. It began when Doris Whitfield leaned over a fence and asked a stranger if he always ate alone. It began when I chose to believe that family is not only blood, it is presence, consistency, showing up on Sunday and staying through the winter. You deserve a Sunday garden. Go build one.